Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the BeckDeck podcast. I am Kenton Hornbeck, co host of the aforementioned podcast, joined alongside Logan Decker. Logan, how are we doing this week?
Doing fantastic, man. Another wonderful Sunday. We're creeping closer to Christmas. What, 4 days away now? We got to watch some pretty good football this past weekend with college football, the first round. And then we're in the midst of the setting up for the playoffs in the NFL. And we have, if you're into fantasy football, it's semifinals or potentially your championship matchups, depending on your league lineup. So we're nearing the end of the football season, which always goes by quickly, and it's fun while you're in it, but you never realize how quick it goes by. So I'm trying to milk and enjoy this as much as I can.
Yeah, man, you're right. I feel like football, when it's away, you're always waiting for so long for it to come back. And then when it finally arrives, it goes by in the blink of an eye. Because I feel like fall is like one of the busiest like work seasons for a lot of people, just in general. You're coming off summer, then football comes back, and it's just a dead sprint towards like Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and it mixes in with all of those things and then obviously the playoffs to kick off like next year. But yeah, this season has gone by in the blink of an eye. I remember not too long ago when my team was in first place, and then in the blink of an eye, the Colts were on the precipice of falling out of the playoffs. So that's just how these things go.
Yeah, it's you know what? At least you had that hope, that flash in a bottle. Our division's tough, man. I did not think Jacksonville would be jumping out as hot. I've always been a little bit negative on Trevor Lawrence, but he looks phenomenal this year. It looks like second half of the year he's cleaned up his mistakes. The defense is coming alive. The trade for Jacoby Myers has been phenomenal for their offense, while Travis Hunter's been hurt and Brian Thomas Jr.'s been up and down all year. And then the Texans look like they have one of the top three scariest defenses in the league. It's Our division's tough, and it's going to be for years coming. That's for sure. Um,
Yeah,
but we,
Jacoby. Oh, really quick, I want to add Jacoby's one of the most underrated wide receivers in the league. And regarding Jacksonville, I feel like every about 6 seasons, they just have one of these years where they're pretty good. I don't know what they're going to do in the playoffs, but they do have a pretty talented roster, all things considered.
yeah, we're just going to have to wait as of right now because a lot of the teams are basically, I don't want to say they're locked in or set. Some of them are, some of them are not, but it'd have to be pretty catastrophic for some of these teams to fall out of the playoffs that are projected to be in. So it's really going to come down to seeding and seeing who Jacksonville and a lot of these other teams and see who they're actually going to play. The matchups are going to be the key to see who's moving forward and who's not. That being said, I want to save the NFL talk a little bit to the end because this is more projection. We actually have some games going on today. We had a couple yesterday, one on Thursday. I want to talk a little bit more about college football, the first round, because all those games are over. We got to see 3 games yesterday. We got to see 1 game on Friday. And I figured let's tackle this in chronological order. And in my opinion, the best game, the most entertaining, was on Friday between Alabama and Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think that game was really interesting because nothing to do with football, but Alabama and Oklahoma almost have identical color palettes. And also, Kalen DeBoer and Brent Venables look very similar when they're wearing black sweatshirts and red hats. So there were times where I was watching it with some of my coworkers who are women and don't really watch college football that much, and then also my girlfriend, and they keep mixing both of them up, and then I kept doing the same because they like obviously I know the insignia, but if I wasn't like looking super close, they look really similar. So I just think that's kind of funny. But Alabama 10-3 ends up, they were on the edge of the playoff. They did not perform very well against Georgia in the SEC championship game. Lo and behold, they get Oklahoma in the first round, who I believe Alabama beat in the regular season. And they took care of business. They did what they needed to do. I still think there's an argument to be had regarding Alabama's inclusion in the playoffs, but when they win a game, it's hard to argue against that anymore, especially when you're beating a 10-2 Oklahoma team, who I always felt was a little overrated this season, but they're in one of the two top conferences. When you have about, 10 wins, you're going to get included in that conversation. Alabama, to me, feels kind of like the sixth, seventh best team in this thing. I mean, they're still really talented, but they're not the Alabama of old with Nick Saban. I think they get a lot of grace because people associate those two eras from DeBoer to Saban because they're so close together chronologically. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that they were playing Michigan in the college football playoff with Jim Harbaugh at the helm of the Wolverines. But Alabama's inclusion in this thing, I was a little skeptical of. I'm not going to lie, but at the end of the day, you can never count them out. They're one of the biggest brands in college football, and that has to count for something.
Yeah, it's definitely they were the controversy of them getting in and Notre Dame being out, along with Miami in that process. I'm not going to dive too heavy into the Notre Dame being left out. I'm not upset by that personally. I could go on a 10-minute tangent here. I might save that a little bit to the end about that, but I thought the right decision was made on that. Notre Dame fans can hate me for that. I do not care. I think this is a signal to them that it's time to officially join a conference. I think that was the ultimate signal from the playoff committee it's like, hey, you've lost to both of these teams. They lost to Miami earlier in the year. When you lose your two toughest scheduled games and you win out and you're technically not in a conference and you're not playing for a conference championship game, it's really tough to defend yourself or put up a good argument why you deserve to get in while these other teams are competing or have a better head-to-head record. Like I said, I could talk on to that. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about this game. Coming in, if you would have asked me who I thought was going to win, I was thinking Oklahoma. I really was. And the reason for that was Oklahoma has a phenomenal defense. They're one of the best run defenses in the country. And Alabama, if you look at it historically, this is probably one of the worst rushing offensive attacks that they've had in the past 20 years. If I'm looking at rankings, looking at Alabama here, they are 115th in terms of how often they run the ball, 45% of the time, and their yards of rush is 3.3. That's 121st in FBS. That does not sound like a team with Alabama. So Alabama's offense has really this year has been focused on the passing attack. And I figured coming in that Oklahoma, who's had this phenomenal defense all year, would be flexing on them, really forcing Ty Simpson to do some big game moments because I didn't think he would get a lot of help with the run game. And it turns out Ty Simpson did step up. He had a phenomenal game. Each quarterback, between him and John Mateer had gotten sacked 5 times. So both of these defenses were really on point. I don't count the loss for Oklahoma for their defense. I don't account for the 17-0 initial start being necessarily for Alabama's defense. And this game was really, if you want to talk about this is a momentum game, that is that because Oklahoma comes out, they look phenomenal to start the gate. They go up 17-0. And I think the big switch that happened is that when it was a 3rd and 3, the second quarter, about 4 minutes, 30 seconds left, and John Mateer broke at the sack, and he's rolling towards his left. And he throws a pretty good ball on the run, a little bit across his body to the running back, Xavier Robinson, who it looks like he's doing more of a corner route. He's breaking across the field, and he drops it. He alligator arms it, definitely catchable. And then the next play is when they get the punt blocked. And then Alabama just takes that momentum and they put up, as the game goes on into the third quarter, they go on a 27-0 run, which is wild. And then you're sitting there like, okay, is this game over? Is all the momentum? And then, of course, Oklahoma, Mateer drives it back down the field at the start of the fourth, hits a 37-yard touchdown to his wide receiver, Deion Burks, or I should say not Burks, that was Brooks that caught that one. But shout out to Deion Burks if you were watching that game. He was doing some pretty phenomenal stuff as a receiver, having a lot of phenomenal catches on the edge of the sideline, making NFL-style catches, not one but two, really keeping the drive along. And I felt like that was for both teams, is that they were consistently running into third down, and it was just conversions when they needed to. So Oklahoma were to get it back down 24-27. And then it was just Oklahoma had these missed opportunities. So I could argue one of their best players is an award winner. It's the Lou Grasso Collegiate Place Kicker Award, Tate Sandell, who on the year is 23 of 24. He's 8 from 9 from 40 to 49 yard distance, 7 from 7 for 50 plus, and he missed 2 field goals this game, so that hurt him. I would be surprised. I feel so bad for the punter for Oklahoma, because he had, when they blocked that punt, it wasn't, I don't know, as a punter, when you're kind of releasing the ball, how you mistime it so bad that you let the ball hit the turf and you re-catch it and you try to punt it again. That's never going to work out. That happened. And then he had a couple terrible punts throughout that game where he set up Alabama's offense really, really well to make some plays and move it down the field. But it was a great game. It's definitely frustrating for Oklahoma fans how that played out, because it was very winnable. It was just these minor mistakes that they were making. They were adding up, and Alabama was not making the same mistakes. Ty Simpson, no turnovers, no interceptions. Mateer made a crucial interception at one point. And Alabama, once again, I thought that the rush defense for Oklahoma would be phenomenal, and it was. Alabama only had 28 rushing yards for the game. Didn't matter, because they were so efficient with the passing game, finding ways to move the ball down the field, and their defense was setting it up with good field opportunities as well. So that was definitely my most exciting game of the first round so far, very back and forth. If you missed it, I'm sorry for you. Go watch the highlights on YouTube. But it was a great game. It really, really was.
Yeah, the thing about Oklahoma is I was kind of rooting for them, low key, because it would have been interesting to have Oklahoma be officially back. I felt like this win over Alabama potentially could have been like a marquee moment for the program post Lincoln Riley leaving the school, because they had that run there for a little while with Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, all NFL caliber quarterbacks. And once Lincoln left, the program kind of, I think Brent Venables is a good coach. I think he is a good coach. It's just different than what we're used to for Oklahoma, because their offense was so potent. This win potentially could have brought a little more luster back to the overall shine of the Sooners, who have struggled a little bit in the college football playoff era, but they've been pretty era as in the new 12 team one, because now it's so much more competitive. They're losing out on guys to Texas or, even sometimes Ole Miss, A&M. There's just a lot more competition there. Now that they're in the SEC, they don't become just one of the top Big 12 teams, and that is automatically thrusting you into the conversation. Now they're going to have a lot more opportunities to get dinged throughout the regular season by playing a tougher schedule. They've obviously had to adjust to that. This year was a pretty good adjustment, all things considered. They finished the year 10-3, no bowl win, but they were competitive the whole year. That's really all you could ask for if you're a Sooners fan. besides winning this game, of course. And, Alabama, they really aren't the same team as I was explaining earlier, but the program overall still has a lot of fanfare. DeBoer's a good coach. Alabama, I think, will continue to get better and still cement themselves at the top of the playoff bracket more or less every year, unless they have some sort of collapse. What I like to think about, which I think is more interesting, is what would have happened if Alabama lost this game. Because I have a lot of Alabama fans in my life. I feel like the pitchforks would have been out for Kalen DeBoer, whether fairly or unfairly. Personally, I think it's irrational and unfair. It kind of felt like UK fans wanting to can Mark Pope after losing to ranked teams while half of his team is hurt. I think DeBoer could succeed at Alabama, but I've heard the critique that his personality doesn't quite mesh with the Southern sensibilities needed to be the head coach at the school. Totally understand that. We kind of touched on that last week with the Michigan conversation. So it would have been interesting, in my opinion, to see if Kalen DeBoer's job was on the line, quote unquote, during this game. And if they would have lost, would they have just canned him? Would they have cut the cord? Hey, we're going to go find somebody else. That's something I thought was maybe on the table after this game.
No, this was a big win for DeBoer. I think he definitely bought at least another year in Alabama, which is wild to say that, it's like, oh, you just got this coach, you just paid him all this money, and you are going to cut him. I'm like, that's Alabama football. There's probably 5 teams, 5 colleges that have that ability or are impatient like that, and Alabama is one of those programs, one of those fan bases that need to be in the conversation every year. And he did his job. He beat Oklahoma. I think that was the bare minimum. They are moving on to face Indiana next week, and which is going to be, I think, another fun game. If I had to pick right now, I think I'd have to lean Indiana in that one. But I think Alabama they still have a really good chance, as long as Ty Simpson, the receivers are playing well and they're able to play at least with a little bit of balance, try to keep Indiana's defense honest, with having some type of success with the run game. They're not dead because that Alabama defense is still very good. Still very, very good.
Yeah, I'm with you on that actually, because in my opinion, Indiana is still the second best team in the playoff behind Ohio State. I know that Ohio State lost to them in the Big Ten championship, but Alabama's going to have their hands full because I think the top echelon of the Big Ten was better than the top echelon of the SEC. We saw that with A&M going down to Miami and losing, and also Ole Miss is still, in my opinion, the second best team in the SEC, even though they lost Lane Kiffin. You can see the infrastructure there in their win, against, was it Tulane, albeit against a weaker opponent. So it remains to be seen. But I do think Ohio State's still the best team left in the playoff, despite the loss. Alabama's going to have their hands full next week, and I don't like making predictions on things getting ugly, but I do think there could be a break in the game if they get down a little early. They have the Heisman Trophy winner, Fernando Mendoza, on the Hoosiers. And I also want to add, just kind of food for thought for you and the audience, is how does the fan base react in Alabama if they get their doors blown off? Not saying it will happen, just in an alternate universe. Say they get beat by like 20 plus, maybe even 25. How does the fan base react to losing to Indiana? Because Indiana is great. They've been good 2 years in a row. They're probably the favorites to win the national championship. But do Alabama fans just take that? Because they definitely view Indiana as a little brother, even if they've cemented themselves as one of the best programs in college football.
It's a good question. I would like to think that Alabama would not get their doors blown off. You can't say it's not a possibility, But I think Indiana has at least on their resume to say we have beaten Ohio State this year. We have not lost a game this year. They deserve the number one spot. Um, it would still be frustrating, I would imagine, for Alabama fans, but at this point, no matter how much further you go, you are not going to be favored to win any one of these games. You have to be a little realistic. This is a good Bama team. This is not a. It's tough to say. I don't want to sit here and say this is not a championship roster, in my opinion. I hate to say it, but they are a very, very good team. But Indiana has a better roster. Ohio State has a better roster. Georgia has a better roster. I could argue as well Ole Miss has a better roster. Oregon has a better roster.
Yeah.
Texas Tech, I would say, has a better roster. That's just me. I think out of all the teams that are left, if they were to face Miami, I would feel comfortable with against them with Miami if they had to play. I doubt that's going to happen in terms of a matchup going forward. It's be happy with your season. You can't win a championship every year. You won a playoff game. You walked into Oklahoma and won fairly handedly. You had a fantastic comeback. You showed what your team can be, a juggernaut with all the cylinders firing right. So they have a good chance against Indiana. And you are playing at the Rose Bowl, so it at least is a neutral site. Anything can happen. I do think it'll be a good game. I am excited for it, but Indiana is a very legitimate team.
I want to add on really quick. What you were saying about roster building and roster outlook is a good point because this isn't the same Alabama team to where if all of the teams ranked above it were to lose or, underperform and lose, that people have this inclination to just push Alabama up to the top of the conversation because the floor of the roster is so high. That doesn't exist anymore with the DeBoer era. Alabama is just another one of these teams. You've tiered them with Miami. I think that sounds right to me. When I hear Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, all of those teams, in my opinion, are better than Alabama. And in years past, we could have just penciled Alabama in as a team like, oh, Clemson lost, but Alabama could still win the championship, even though maybe they're not number one. They may be like 3 or 4, but they still have so many NFL guys and guys able to rise to the occasion that if a top team faltered, Alabama could be in that conversation. I don't think this kind of Alabama team is in that conversation anymore.
I agree 100%. We'll just have to wait and see what it looks like next week. The next game I want to talk about, staying in order, this was kind of the exact opposite of a tempo game, momentum, and this was the Miami-Texas A&M game, which I hope you like defense because that's what this game was all about. I will note that you don't think about the weather playing an impact as much, and it really wasn't. It wasn't storming, wasn't snow, nothing like that. I believe before the broadcast, and you definitely get to see it throughout the game, they're saying there's 30, 40 mile an hour wind gusts going through there, and both of these teams missed so many scoring opportunities with field goals. So the score could have definitely been a different conversation, but I give credit to both of these defenses. They both played lights out when they needed to. I think a lot of people, when they think of the Hurricanes and Carson Beck this year, they don't think as much about Miami's defense, and this is a unit that has gone under the radar for the most part. So in terms of statistics, opponents' points per game, 14.8. They are 6th in the country. For yards a game, they give up 285. That's 11th in the country. In terms of opponents' third down conversion, 31%. That's 10th in the country. Yards a rush, only 4.0. That's 91st. Yards a game, 144. I apologize. I'm reading the rushing stats there. Opponents' yards rushing, 2.9, which is 7th in the country. Opponents' rushing yards a game, 86.4. That's 7th in the country. So there's so many of these categories on defense where they are top 10 in the country against the run. In terms of, passing, opponents' yards per pass, 6.1, that's 13th. Sack percentage, 8.1 per snap, that's 18th in the country. This is a phenomenal defense that does not get talked about because Carson Beck is one of those faces in the college football who's polarizing with what he did at Georgia and how he's performed so far with Miami. Now, it's a little unfair because I believe he's not even the best piece on their offense. That's the running back, Mark Fletcher. And he had a phenomenal game. He put the team on his back. If you want to talk about it, if you're looking down the offensive splits here about, well, who really stands out and who really did well, it's like, well, for Miami, it was definitely Mark Fletcher, their running back, 17 carries, 172 yards. He had a couple long runs that put them in scoring position. Carson Beck only had 103 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 14 of 20. And in terms of the Texas A&M side, what offensive success they did have, it was on the back of Marcel Reed, who is not a quarterback that I want throwing 39 times in a game, but that's what happened. Their rushing attack was very underwhelming this game. Their lead back, Reuben Owens, 7 carries, 21 yards. Another running back in the committee, Le'Veon Moss, 7 carries, 15 yards. Marcel Reed had the most, 15 carries for 27 yards. And Reed, I would say what hurt this team the most, I'd say both of them. Carson Beck, Marcel Reed, they were not accurate that game at all. And, the wind definitely plays a factor. But Marcel Reed's, because they were relying on him so much to make these third down conversions, try to move the ball down the field, he just could not do it consistently enough, and that's where the 2 interceptions comes in. There's so many times where he threw a ball that was just out of the fingertips of his receiver, and it hurt them. For the longest time, we were sitting there 0-0 at halftime. Miami puts up the field goal in the third. Texas A&M puts up their field goal at the beginning of the fourth, and it wasn't until the very end of the game that Miami had put a touchdown on the board, 10-3, and it was a slug match, man. Both of these defenses were playing really good, where the weather just hurt both of these teams' offenses. I was really excited. So the Paul Hornung Award winner was a wide receiver for Texas A&M with KC Conception. I was really excited to see what he did. It looks like he got a little banged up during that game. I believe they were saying on the broadcast it was with his hamstring. He was kind of in and out of the lineup. So that was a little disappointing because he was one of the guys that are in the upper echelon in the country just in terms of explosive plays. 57 catches on the year, 886 yards, 9 touchdowns. And it just didn't get to really see him shine. And I think the big story coming in, and I've talked to various people, in terms of teams that some of these people had nominated to be quote-unquote fraudulent, and this is not me, this is other people, Texas A&M was one of those teams that were placed up there just because of the schedule that they've had in the SEC was notably weaker than their SEC counterparts that was in the playoff. It's just that when you win games in the SEC, no matter who your opponent is, you're going to get in. So definitely not as a high-scoring affair. It was still a good game to watch, just because the defenses were playing out of their minds. On top of it, just getting pressures, making mistakes happen. The freshman cornerback for Miami. I'm forgetting his last name at the moment, so forgive me. But he's phenomenal. I think it's Fitzpatrick, Fitzmore. It's along that line. I think they said he had 5. This is 5th or 6th interception on the season, leading the team as a freshman, a true freshman. That's phenomenal. Miami has some real dogs on that defense. And, I gave a lot of kudos to Mark Fletcher, but, one of the wide receivers for Miami that just did not get to show out this game was Malachi Toney, who walked into this game, just shy of 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. This is one of the probably better Miami teams in the past decade, just in terms of pure talent. And I think that showed, not good conditions for both teams, and the team that had the more talent, that had the better depth, was able to slug this one out.
College football, excuse me. College football is always more fun when Miami is good. Obviously, I think Miami has access to a lot of talent, a lot of money to pour into their program. So they've been able to jumpstart a rebuild that's now looking to be complete under the Mario Cristobal regime. I think this game was pretty boring for the most part until the end, which is when I turned it on. I got back from getting coffee with my girlfriend, flipped this game on. It's 3-3. Miami had just broke off a really long run, scored a touchdown, and then we had the Marcel Reed show where they drove down the field fairly quickly, and he didn't look super confident when they were in the red zone trying to find guys. He was behind on the last throw that got intercepted. His timing was off, and he got picked. It wasn't a great throw. I was expecting a little more from them there, but that's A&M. You're always expecting a little more. The Mike Elko A&M teams always feel like really good. I don't know if they could win a national championship, and that's kind of just the issue with A&M. But at the end of the day, they always have really good players, and they're well coached. So it remains to be seen if going forward they're going to be able to, break that glass ceiling, because we've watched A&M be good. They've been good since we've been like football conscious, essentially. Let's say since 2010 when they had Johnny Manziel and everybody, since they really got into the SEC. And they've never been able to – they've always had the talent to be one of the best teams, and it never really seems to happen for them. They always have dudes on NFL rosters. I feel like with Mike Elko at the helm, they're really set up well, but I don't know if he's the guy that's going to get them over the top. But I hope he is, because I think he's a good coach and he's a nice guy. Miami, they move on. They were on the fringe of the playoff picture. They were in a weak ACC this year. I was looking through everything. Virginia, SMU, Miami, Pittsburgh. Georgia Tech, 9-3. Louisville was really disappointing. I actually picked Louisville to win the conference at the beginning of the year. I thought this was something that could happen, maybe a little more of a long shot, but they didn't get it done. They lost to teams like Cal, who are kind of fringe. So, Miami, all of this to say is Miami giving the ACC a big reputational boost with this win over A&M, who was legitimately one of the best teams in the country. Certainly a top 10 team for most, if not the whole year. So Miami saved the ACC's credibility with this win, essentially, because there's people, rightfully, in my opinion, saying that the ACC should not have a team represented in the 12-team playoff. There were people saying that James Madison or Tulane should get in over an ACC team. In the end, the committee gave Miami the benefit of the doubt. They had 10 wins going into this game. They had a win against Notre Dame, who, although didn't make the playoff, was consistently a top 15 team the entire year. They were also the national championship runner-up last year. So that really gives Miami a big boost in terms of making it. And they did have Carson Beck, who played pretty good the entire year. But this game at the end, it's what you want in the college football playoff. And it goes to say a lot about college football, that it could be a slugfest the entire game, and then the last 7 minutes of the game, things just flip on a dime, and you ended up getting a really good game. It's really interesting also because Kyle Field, where Texas A&M plays, has to be a pretty daunting place to be an opposing team. You got all those loud Texans down there. They have a little bit of an underdog complex because of Texas and Oklahoma historically, and in the SEC to teams like Alabama. But they also expect to win. They have the talent they don't expect to lose to a team like Miami because we're Texas A&M, and then Miami beats them, and here we are. So I just think it's kind of interesting how that environment shifted on a dime. I remember that one of the last plays of the drive where Reed threw a slant toward, I think it was on second down, and a Miami player got rocked on in a collision, and that place just went silent. And I was thinking, man, over however many people, I think it's like over 100,000 people, just completely silent. It was a little eerie. That stuck out to me.
Yeah, that is. Texas A&M is one of the toughest places to play. I believe they said it was over 105,000 people can fit in that stadium. That is one of the largest stadiums in the entire college football. I off the top of my head, I can only think of Ohio State and Michigan having larger stadiums. They're definitely top five. You are 100% right. Miami needed this. The ACC needed this win because this is a conference that has been kind of sliding back a little bit with the national conversation of, oh, what's the power conferences? What this? And Clemson has been a huge disappointment this year. Louisville has been a disappointment this year. SMU has taken a step backwards from last year. Miami was, as somebody who roots for Louisville, Miami was our only hope, and I'm glad they did get in. And I will say kudos to the committee because everybody was giving them hate for letting Alabama and Miami win, and they both won. So they're feeling good, patting themselves on the back for that. And you turned the game on at the best time. You got to see Marcel Reed play his best football in the last 5 minutes of that game because, man, it was not good. Texas A&M was not moving the ball. See, at least Miami was making it down there consistently. They just kept missing, 41, 42-yard field goals to score. Texas A&M, I think they only missed one field goal because that's how many opportunities they had to score. And there was one play, I want to say it was in the second quarter. I don't understand why teams do this anymore besides trying to do ultimate shock value, but it's like, oh, it's fourth down. We're going to try to, convert this with our punt team. Just go out with the offense. This is not, you don't need to play, tricks, play cute. There was just more questionable decisions from the Texas A&M coaching staff on certain play selections. I will say this is the football nerd in me, but Miami did this a lot in the first quarter. So Texas A&M's defense would, and most defenses do, they kind of line up in priority with where's the tight end going to play because that's the strong side of the formation. Miami was doing this formation where they would come out and they'd line up, and you got your tailback, you got your quarterback, and then in front of the quarterback, underneath the center was their tight end. And then right before the play would start, they'd signal for the motion, and then the tight end would line up in his true alignment. So what it was doing is really causing the Texas A&M defense to kind of shift late, and that's how they were able to move the ball on plenty of plays. So it was one of those, I'm like, oh, that's pretty interesting. I haven't really seen that a lot. Miami's doing this pretty effective. But it was a good defensive struggle. The weather played a factor, and I think had it been a non-windy day, perfect conditions, I do think Miami probably still would have won this and probably would have had more points on the board, forcing Texas A&M maybe to be even more aggressive. But, I'll have to wait and see. Of course, who does Miami have in the next matchup next weekend? That's Ohio State. I hate to say this. I can't say Miami doesn't have a chance, but I don't care what the odds are. I wouldn't bet $1 for Miami to win this game. I just don't see it possible. Ohio State is just a more well-rounded team, one of the best, you could argue, one or two defenses in the country. Miami's talented. Ohio State is the talent, in terms of players and depth. And it's, they're going to be playing in the Cotton Bowl. I don't see it. I don't trust Carson Beck to do that, to lead against the juggernaut, the man that is. He holds onto the ball too long and he tries to make stuff happen, and that's not something that you can do against Ohio State. He's going to have to get the ball out quick. He's going to have to be decisive. He's going to need help from his run game, and that Miami defense is going to have to show up and play. They did phenomenal this weekend. They're got to do even better next weekend. That's a tall task just to meet the level of play that I'm expecting out of Ohio State.
Ohio State's got some maulers. I expect Ohio State to win this game handily, and I think Ohio State's offensive capability with Julian Sayin is going to be a little too much for Miami's defense. But also, like you were saying, the big boys up front for Ohio State are just more talented. Ultimately, I think that gets it done. Personally, I believe Ohio State is the best team in the country still. Although Indiana beat them, as I was saying earlier, in the Big Ten championship game, I'm going to need to see it again because Ohio State won the national championship last year, coming off a loss to Michigan. So I think it's going to be a tall task for the Hurricanes, and ultimately their program is back to national prominence, but I don't think they're real national title contenders. And if you couple everything with their reputation throughout the season, where for a long time people thought Miami was one of the best teams in college football. Then they had a rough patch, and then quickly people were like, well, I actually don't know if they are because of the overall records of the teams in the ACC, which took a step back this year. I mean, really quick on the ACC, I was kind of talking about this earlier, so were you, dude, I'm looking at this. I mean, Florida State, 5-7. Clemson 7-5. These are marquee teams in your conference. Florida State and Clemson cannot be bad at football for the ACC to, be projected forward. I mean, I think they're the worst Power 4 conference right now in football because of Texas Tech's emergence over in the Big 12. They're not much better, like, let's be clear, but I still think they're better than the ACC, so it remains to be seen. Also, you made a comment that I want to hit on is the committee did get maligned for including Alabama and Miami. They were critiqued, and rightfully so, although in hindsight, now those wins by Miami and Alabama kind of proved the committee right. However, they're not out of the woods yet because they let Tulane and James Madison into the playoff, which I was cool with one of the two teams being in personally. I don't know all of the stipulations around the group of five getting in, but I will say compare one of these or those teams to like the Cincinnati team that lost Alabama in the playoff a couple of years ago, or the UCF team that infamously did not get in. They finished undefeated with Scott Frost. I think that was 2017. Claimed a national title. People were upset they didn't get a chance. To me, Tulane, James Madison were not on the level of those kind of group of five teams. And in a way, it was kind of a weak year for the top tier group of five teams. And by allowing them into the playoff, I feel like the committee hurt the overall reputation of the group of five by fielding teams in the playoff who weren't up to par because the overall ceiling of the top tier group of five teams weren't that good this year. I mean, Tulane had a couple losses. James Madison had a couple losses. I mean, James Madison I think in 2019 they were in the FCS national championship game. Now they're in the college football playoff. Not saying it wasn't cool to see them there, and I'm certainly not of the Paul Feinbaum mentality that no group of five teams should be in the playoff. But it is kind of a bad look for both the group of five and the committee when a team like Notre Dame doesn't get in, and then you have two playoff games that are essentially non-factors because the two group of five schools weren't up to snuff. I think Tulane, maybe like last year's Tulane team, would have certainly been better in the playoff. But I think in a roundabout way, the committee ended up hurting the reputations of those schools because they gave them a chance and then they underperformed on the biggest stage. Even though the group of five does field good teams. I just feel like this wasn't their best this year. So not to go on a tangent on that, but I'd like to get your opinion on the committee's selections because the Ole Miss game, the Oregon game, they weren't really. I don't really feel like there's much analysis there, honestly.
No, it's a tough spot for the committee, and I don't envy them because you can't leave the group of five out. You can't do it, otherwise, they're just going to be trying to find a way to get into one of the bigger leagues, bigger conferences, and obviously you can't have that with over 130, whatever the magic number is for FBS schools that you have at Division One. It can't be done. You can't. Maybe we're headed to that in the future with super conferences, but not right now. You got to let these teams have a chance, but it's almost like they're trying to figure out how to create these little Cinderella stories, and that works for college basketball and March Madness, but it does not work with college football. It just doesn't. I will never, I did the research on it. I probably put too much time looking at JMU and Oregon, Tulane, and looking at these guys' rosters just to know that in all likelihood they're going to lose by 21 plus points, and that's me being nice on those figures there. You can't take it away, but I think you have every argument to say, well, Notre Dame deserves to be in over Tulane or JMU. And I'm like, I 100% agree. That is a better team than those two. I think this is the one argument that people could make about expanding the playoff to 16, which I'm indifferent to. Personally, I like the 12. But I could see this, let's just say you have to give it a couple years and this keeps happening, or you'll have these one or two teams that miss out with controversy. Eventually, the committee's going to fold and be like, all right, 16, screw it. Just because, these games, I'll dive into Tulane Ole Miss first. I mean, at halftime, it was 17-3. By the end of the third, it was 27-3. They ended the game 41-10. And it's not like Tulane played bad. It came out. That first quarter, it was just, Tulane had a couple missteps. And JMU, Tulane, they have to play a perfect game throughout. And it's like, we dropped the ball on third down conversion. And then all of a sudden, I think in the first quarter they were saying, like, in 7 plays of offense for Ole Miss, they had something like 7 plays for 135 yards. Like, Trinidad Chambliss looks like he, should have won the Heisman the way that he's playing. Kwan Lacey was just doing whatever he wants. They had 3 different runners have damn near 6 yards a carry for their average. It was, and it's not saying that Tulane wasn't talented. Like, their quarterback, Jake Retzlaff, he impressed me. He went 20-35, 306 yards passing, a touchdown, and interception. They did have a fun play where he was the kickoff returner. And he's actually got some wheels. I want to say, in terms of stats, he's the team's leading rusher as their quarterback going on the year. And, they do have some talent. It's just, I saw the one picture, I believe, this past week where they looked at the committee, or I should say the commitments this past year from JMU and Oregon. And JMU had like 3 or 4 players that were 4 stars, and everybody else was 3 and under. And listen, the number of stars don't necessarily matter. I think it's a good read to see overall talent level. And it was like Oregon had, almost double-digit 5 stars and had like 34 stars, and it was just the talent, and it's not even the height of the talent. It's just the overall talent that you have on your team. It's like, wow, we have a really good left guard and a wide receiver. And then Ole Miss and Oregon's like, we have 5 really good wide receivers, and we have our backup offensive line could start for 75% of the schools in the country right now. So I don't know what the answer is, because I mean the Tulane Ole Miss game, the James Madison game looks better. It's 51-34, but that was garbage points. If I'm being honest, it was a 34-6 game at half, and Oregon let off the gas a little bit. It just these two games were not a. Let's just say we knew coming in for the most part that this was going to be one-sided affairs. I was interested in the Tulane game just because of Lane Kiffin leaving and the coaching staff mix up. I'm like, well, maybe Tulane catches them slipping a little bit, able to put some points on the board quickly, and it was the exact opposite out of the gate. And I was like, okay, this game's over. I honestly thought that when they jumped up that quickly. I'm like, there's no way Tulane has the firepower to come back like this and make the defensive stops. I thought offensively they could probably maybe hang around with them, but defensively, I'm like, Tulane does not have that defense to make consistent stops. And I'll be quite honest, I wanted to try to watch the Oregon JMU game. I was not able to get around from it. I got the stats pulled up, but it's such a one-sided affair. Dante Moore had 313 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. He had 2 INTs, probably trying to just make something happen. Jordan Davidson had 9 yards a carry to get 90. Malik Benson had 5 catches, 119 yards. It's just, it's. I don't want to say this and sound bad, but it's for them. It's like, do they have a tougher time during the week when they're doing offense versus defensive reps versus a team like, Oregon and JMU? And I'm not trying to be like, oh, you think the practice player. I'm like, I think some of those practice guys might have better overall talent. We'll see. I do think the playoff and the committee will have to change something in the future. I just don't expect it next year. In terms of matchups coming up, and feel free to interrupt me if you had any further comments.
Yeah, I wanted to add really quick. So I did catch the beginning of the Tulane Ole Miss game because, like you, I was interested in Tulane because Ole Miss was coming off Lane Kiffin leaving for LSU. I thought there was a little chance there for disruption. I also think John Sumrall is a really good coach. And comparing James Madison to Tulane, I thought Tulane was the better team. And if there was going to be a group of 5 school to make the playoff, I thought it should have been Tulane because of their historical precedent being good the past couple seasons. But like you were saying, once Ole Miss, Chambliss just drove the ball right down the field, first possession. They looked pretty good. I thought Tulane hung around there a little bit, but overall they were outmatched, outgunned. I do think the committee is going to have to do something. We've probably seen the last of 2 group of 5 schools making the playoffs in this type of manner because of the ratings and everything. I don't have them pulled up. I'm sure they got good ratings, but I can't imagine that if it was like Notre Dame versus Ole Miss and they're missing out on all of that money. Like, I know that's not what they should be striving for. Like, as a fan, that's not what we all want, but I feel like that's it. The money is what it is, and that kind of matchup is going to drive revenue, drive sales, and probably produce a better overall product in the end. But I think that the committee is not going to make the same mistake twice, and there's going to be a bias coming into future years against group of 5 teams, unless they're so undeniable. Say we have 2 12-0 group of 5 teams, like we have a Boise State like last year and a 2021 Cincinnati, then you have more of a conversation, especially if the Power 5 is beating each other up throughout the year, or the Power 4, excuse me. But I just feel bad because they're not going to get the same kind of look reputationally going forward because of the strength of schedule, because of the talent discrepancy. And the last thing I'm going to add, and you brought this up a little earlier, is the college football guys, Clay Travis, these dudes on Twitter, they want to manufacture March Madness for college football. And like you, I agree that it's not the same sport. Basketball, obviously, is less physically demanding on the body. What's so great about the college football upsets, take like Appalachian State beating Michigan in 2006, is that is their Super Bowl, and there is a small potential for the upset to happen and a magical moment to happen. I mean, we've all seen it throughout the years, but when you're asking an undermanned team to play three straight games against like Penn State, Ohio State, Georgia, and expect them to do that is just almost impossible, in my opinion. It's just, you can't manufacture that type of upset in college football, like the 12 team playoffs, because of the way everything is engineered and the talent discrepancies. And I ultimately think college football is more of an elitist sport. I don't want the little guy to not have a chance. I was of the mind that Cincinnati should have made it in 2021. If you look back on that roster, it was full of NFL guys, and I thought they were the fourth best team in the country that year, and I thought they deserved it. Boise State last year was really great. I thought they deserved it. I'm not one of these people who is anti little guys, but I do think that college football is an elitist sport. It's always been that way. And if you have the money, if you have the recruiting base, if you have the boosters, you're going to be able to just build a team that's almost impossible to beat if you're one of these smaller schools. And personally, I'm not going to pontificate too much on this. I always liked the 14 playoff. I know it kind of made college football a little more boring because it concentrated the power of the teams into like four. So every year the playoff kind of looked the same. We had like some version of Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe they should have done six and had like two play-ins. I thought that was probably the perfect system. I don't really like 12. I think it cheapens this, but people still watch it. So that's just my opinion. But I think when we start to get to like 12 to 16 to all this, it doesn't feel like college football anymore. And especially now with the NIL and the portal and et cetera, et cetera, we're starting to cheapen what it actually is. And at least with the four, to me, why it was so cool for Cincinnati to make the number 4 spot is they were the only group of 5 team in that the 10 years or 9 years at that point of the playoff to be one of the 4 best undisputed teams in the country. And I thought that's a massive accomplishment, even though they didn't win the bowl game. I thought, like, you can never take that away from them because of, they finished up there with Alabama. That's incredible. That's great. And now we're letting, like, James Madison in, and they had it doesn't even feel like that team was the same as the 01 or the 21 Cincinnati team. And so I think you're like cheapening the accomplishment of actually making the playoff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think this just popped in my head as you were talking, and I think here's maybe the big difference in terms of the Cinderella possibility with college football versus March Madness is that with March Madness, you have your selection Sunday, and then your game usually starts 2 to 3 days after. You don't know who you're going to play, and then you play your game. Let's say you win, you move on to the next round. You may not know who you're going to play out of these two teams. So the window for you to prepare against your opponent is so minimal. You get a couple days, if that. So it's kind of like maybe you're trying to focus more on just playing your type of style of ball, or you're trying to get a sneak peek and look at this team. With college football, you have your selection Sunday, and then you don't play again for another 2 to 3 weeks. So you got these insane head coaches and all this coaching staff that's just watching probably the entire season of film for their first opponent. Oh, they're just diving into it. So you're giving these teams as much time as possible to prepare for their first opponent in here. And I think even though it's like, all right, the talent level's already a disparity. Now you got Oregon, who's going to take 3 weeks because they didn't play in the college, championship. They're getting all their guys healthy again. They are, and as soon as they get the matchup, they can just grind film, and they have more time to prepare for their opponent. You don't get that in basketball. Something I don't know what the answer is on the change, but something does have to change. And this is something I noticed. I didn't think about it until it was already happening. Is that why did they have? I'm like the Oklahoma Alabama game on a Friday night. That kind of makes sense to me. And then I would say next closest big matchup is probably Miami Texas A&M in terms of most hype. They had that at noon, I believe. And then they had the other games. One was at 3 or 4, and one was at 8. Or I'm like, why would they set it up like this? And I didn't realize. I knew that the Packers and the Bears were playing. I didn't realize that what the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles were playing as well. And at least I can't think of it last year. I'm like, why is the NFL and college football kind of stepping on each other's feet right now in terms of viewership? That was just an interesting note that I had started to think about last night and this morning, because usually you would want your it's not your competition. You want both of these to be viewed in order to help the sport of football overall. So it makes me wonder, is that another factor for a potential change going forward? Because you can make the argument that, depending on where you're at, if it's like, do I really want to watch the Oregon JMU game, or do I want to watch, the Bears and Packers game, which was an actual good game last night. So I think there might be some changes, at least in terms of the schedule, or how they do the playoff, not just because of the pressure from, this team versus this team talent level, but also if the NFL is, because they've added on more games and they're trying to, there's no bye weeks at this time for the NFL, and they're starting to fight for TV time, obviously you do not want to go against the NFL, because the NFL is king in terms of viewership in the U.S. So I'm interested to see how that changes, and what before I dive into the matchups, I want to get your opinion on that in terms of the schedules of both of these leagues.
I personally default to the NFL as a viewer because I prefer the NFL over college football. I think in terms of direct competition with the NFL and college football, expanding it kind of put them at odds at each other. I don't think Roger Goodell really cares if he's overshadowing a college football playoff game or anything like that, especially if they've cheapened the product to where it's like, okay, well, what are you going to watch? JMU versus Oregon, or are you going to watch the Bears versus the Packers? And I think most people, unless you're a diehard Oregon fan or you went to JMU, you're going to default to the NFL game. I do think they're going to have to change it going forward, especially if revenue is your top goal, and extracting revenue from, the programs and the TV deals, et cetera, et cetera. There's always going to be people watching these games, but you're not maximizing it by competing with the NFL directly. Now, maybe they don't care as much because their top tier product, these like quarterfinal games or whatever, the semifinal games, championship games, those are ultimately going to be the ones that bring in the most. So maybe they're willing to lose some on the front end as opposed to, the back end when the biggest schools are playing. If it's Ohio State versus Georgia, I think people are going to watch that even if it is the NFL. Now, you still don't want to be in direct competition with it, but I do think changes are coming. What those might be, I really haven't a clue. I'm not a TV executive, but I do think they're going to have to tinker with that some. One thing I also want to comment on is the playoff format. I liked when they made the playoff. I again, it's probably unpopular. I enjoyed the 4. I was listening to Bomani Jones talk about this the other day, and he said something that I thought was smart, in that there's really no perfect way to do this, because I mean, it's one of those things, like, we've been alive long enough. We're both almost 30 years old. We were growing up with the BCS system, which was touted as imperfect. It was always criticized, and it elevated 2 programs above all the other ones. And what happens when a Boise State goes undefeated and beats Oregon, and they're not allowed in because of the bias against the scheduling, and then we created the playoff system. So we give 4 teams a chance now instead of 2 that were selected by a computer. And lo and behold, the same issues arise. Well, now it's these 4 teams that are the best, but what about Baylor? Or what about TCU? Or what about Cincinnati? Or whoever? And now we have 12, and that conversation has, it still goes on, but it's lessened. I don't think people take it as seriously. It's like the 5th best team versus the 4th best team. We can have a conversation because it's a conference winner, the scheduling. Now we're getting toward the end of it. It's like, well, why didn't Vanderbilt make the playoff? And it's like, dude, do we care? So the system, it's so interesting because we're always, as sports fans, looking for the perfect way to make it the most fair for everybody. And college football is beloved because it's perfectly imperfect. And I don't know if we're ever going to be able to square that circle because there's no way to match the amount of money that Texas Tech has versus JMU. They're never going to be on the same level. The coaching staff, you were just talking about guys watching film. That's interesting. Like, think about Saban, Alabama. They were probably like the Harvard of watching film. You had these like football psychos who were probably the best film watchers in the entire country, all on one staff, gearing up to watch UC film or LSU film or whatever. They had that amount of time. And the discrepancies in the programs are always going to outweigh the potential competitive head-to-head because they're just always on uneven footing. So it's perfectly imperfect. I don't know how they could really fix this because it seems like the only solutions people are putting forward is let's just keep expanding. Let's just keep expanding. I heard one argument that the FCS, the football championship system, which is kind of like the Division 1A underneath all the top tier programs, the FBS, they have a type of bracket which could work, but I don't think people, it wouldn't equate the bowls into it quite right. You have all these like legacy type of games and traditions in college football, like the bowls. They've recycled them now to make like the Cotton Bowl the semifinal game. But it's kind of just like a nod to those places and those sites. It's like if you win the Cotton Bowl now, does anybody like actually care? It just means like you've won the semifinal or the quarterfinal. So there's all of these things baked into this that people are trying to figure out like where this quite fits and where we're going toward. And when the only solution is to keep expanding, I think that turns people off more. Because I think there is going to be a breaking point that not people will stop watching college football or people will defer to the NFL, but the conversation, the fun, like what we're doing right now, it becomes so cheapened by the amount of discourse. You keep lessening it. One day we're talking about Alabama, and now we're arguing about Boise State and UCF. Who should make it over? And it's like, okay, we've kind of lost the plot here. So, yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree. I feel like it is going to just go to continuing to expand. I don't think that's the answer. I just think that's the easiest route to do it. And I think they're making this up as they go along. I think, but the problem is, let's say if you expand to 16, well, one team that's at the 17 spot's gonna, quite frankly, they're gonna bitch about not trying, or I missed out. You're always gonna have somebody that feels left out, and you're right, the more and more that you expand the playoff, the less quality football you're gonna get. So, I would say, just let it ride for right now. Just deal with it. Maybe make the decision be a little bit more strict on your smaller schools. Maybe they only get one spot out of it. I don't know. Or maybe you let them, You have a play-in game for who you think out of the other five. Just let them do a play-in for them to be the 12th spot or something like that. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think you should keep expanding. You kind of mentioned the bowl games. I agree. They're, with the Rose, the Cotton, the Orange, the Sugar Bowl. It's just the name for the semifinal now. It means nothing. Nobody cares about the damn trophy anymore. Um, I don't know even how they determine is the whoever's at the 4 seed, is that always the Orange Bowl? I have no idea. There probably is an answer for it. I've never looked it up. Um, in terms of the matchups, I did want to go into this real quick before we jump over to the NFL. We have Texas Tech against Oregon, which I think is probably going to be the most competitive game next weekend. I'm really excited for that matchup because I've had my eyes on Texas Tech ever since the beginning of the year because I knew how much money they had spent for the portal this year and how they've been assembling that team, and they have phenomenal roster. And then you're watching Oregon, who also has a phenomenal roster. They're getting everybody back healthy. It's it's going to be fireworks that game. I don't know. I'm not rooting for anybody. I just want good football at this point. I think that one's probably, once we see the lines, if they're not already out, it's going to be the smallest margin compared to some of the other teams. You got the Sugar Bowl with Ole Miss and Georgia. And if Georgia comes out looking like they did against Alabama, I think they will handle Ole Miss. I'm not going to say easily because I think Ole Miss has enough talent and firepower. I just think if the Georgia team is still playing like they did a few weeks ago, I think Ohio State would be worried about them, let alone Ole Miss. In terms of, we've already discussed, I don't consider Alabama or Miami true threats. I think everybody else that's left is a really good threat or could be in the national championship conversation. I definitely have Georgia, Ohio State, and Indiana maybe slightly above, 1A, and then Oregon, Texas Tech, and Ole Miss 1B. And Oregon's probably the one that I'm a little bit more maybe they belong in that 1A conversation. But it's, Ole Miss, that's the thing. Ole Miss is kind of the wild card team because it's different head coach now. Everybody's got a fire under their ass. Players, coaches. Sometimes having all this time off isn't necessarily helpful for some of these programs. Now, when it's Georgia and, Ohio State, I'm they've been here before, they've done it. I'm kind of curious to see what it looks like with Indiana and Texas Tech, who, if they've, this is Texas Tech first time making it into the playoff, let alone them getting a bye is pretty impressive. How does this team handle having this much time off? And Indiana's a little bit in the same belt. We've always seen them punching up. Well, this is the first time they've been the crown coming in. How does that look against a team that, I could argue Alabama probably looks like, or they feel like they're playing the best football this season right now. So I'm curious. I think this will be a really good, fun weekend. I don't know what your take is. We've already talked about two of the matchups, but what's your thoughts on Texas Tech, Oregon, and Ole Miss, Georgia?
I like this weekend's matchups. Looking through everything, I think we're in for a good slate of college football games. Oregon, Texas Tech, like you, is the one I'm circling. I'm most interested in that game because they're two programs that I think are fun. Kind of, I'm not going to say new bloods because Oregon's been good consistently or essentially our entire lives. Never won a national championship, but always in the mix. And then Texas Tech, kind of a new, fiery team. Obviously, Mahomes went there. They have a little bit of a reputation, but in terms of national championship prominence, is new to that conversation. So having those two teams, probably two of the most fun teams in college football this season, left in the conversation, I think is really interesting. If I had to pick, I'm going to give the slight edge to Oregon just because they're more of a known quantity to me. And I think Dante Moore is a really good quarterback. I think he's projected to go high in the NFL draft. And Dan Lanning, I've seen him coach. I've seen him coach in big games. I think he's got a fire. under those dudes. Oregon is actually the team I low-key think could be the dark horse to win the national championship. I don't know if I'd bet on that, but if I had to select it on the podcast, I think I'm comfortable saying that. In terms of the Ole Miss Georgia game, I really don't know what to make of Ole Miss because they still look really good. Trinidad Chambliss is one of the best players in the country. They have big, stout wide receivers who are hard to take down, but they're playing Georgia, who is, to me, kind of like the Patriots of college football right now. And I don't mean that in terms of like just dynastic success, although they've had some of that. They just feel like good defense, pocket passing quarterback, hard nose running, big boys up front on both the defensive and offensive line. I I I wonder how they're going to play, like match up, because they don't have Lane Kiffin anymore. You could even argue that maybe with the Golding, they could have a little bit better of a chance now that they have the fire under their ass and they're ready to kind of play. Ultimately, I think Georgia probably wins this game. It doesn't seem that Ole Miss is dysfunctional at all, and they did have a tune-up game, so that could be moving in their favor. But I think Georgia's probably too talented. Really quick comments on the other two games. I think Alabama, the way they looked against, even though they played well against Oklahoma, I think the way they did fall behind in that game, and I think the way they looked against Georgia doesn't bode well for them against Indiana, who seems to be really well coached, really well put together. They have consistent quarterback play. And I think Indiana maybe doesn't have the overall talent ceiling of an Alabama, but I think their roster is just better overall because they're more well coached and they're kind of like better fundamentals, move as a unit better. I expect Indiana to win that game probably by like 10 to 14. Alabama will, be competitive, but I expect Indiana to win that game. And then the other one, I'm going to be honest with you. I think Ohio State is going to blow the doors off Miami. I think this is going to get potentially embarrassing for Miami. I think Ohio State, like I was saying earlier, is the best team in the country still. And I think the talent discrepancy between the two teams is going to show itself because, in my opinion, Miami feels like a team that if it gets down bad or down early, that it's going to crumble in on them. And I think Ohio State could just turn it into a track meet and run all over them. That one's not as interesting to me. I'll be watching it. And again, I say this is no. I've been stumping for Ohio State a lot, but I am no Ohio State fan. I want everybody to understand this. I am no fan of Ohio State. I just think their team is really deep, really talented. I think obviously you have the Ryan Day factor where in big game you never know. I know he did it last year, but that still kind of lingers. They're not inevitable like I felt like Saban Alabama was. They're not inevitable to where it's like, oh, we're here we go. We're playing the evil empire. Ohio State is not that, but they certainly are good and they're certainly deep and talented. So if I had to pick four, I'm going Oregon, I'm going Indiana, I'm going Georgia, and I'm going Ohio State.
Just to be a little different, I'll do Indiana, Ohio State, Georgia, and Texas Tech. Yeah, I think it's going to be a good weekend next weekend. That being said, we actually had a phenomenal game that was not college football related the day before Oklahoma and Alabama, and that was the NFC West matchup between the Seahawks and the 49ers, which was not Seahawks and 49ers, Seahawks and Rams, which was the game to basically decide the division to this point. The winner would basically control their destiny. And the Seahawks came back from behind to win the game against the Rams. And I think, what was the record that I've seen? It was, I can't remember, but I want to say it was like, after being down 14 points and, having more plus turnover, you're losing the turnover battle in this, and historically 71 out of 0 teams lose this opportunity, and Seattle was the one that overcame it. That was a hell of a game on Thursday.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was at the bar watching it with my girlfriend, and I hate to admit this to everybody, So I watched essentially the entire game, and it was getting late. We were at the bar it was raining outside when overtime started. Literally, like right after the clock hit zero on regulation, we left to walk home in the rain, and then I didn't turn it back on. So I watched the entire game and did not watch overtime. So that's a faux pas. I'm sorry, everyone. I had the Rams in that game, actually, although I really like Seattle. I thought it was an incredible game. Puka Nakua coming off the controversial stream with Aiden Ross. I was playing him in fantasy this week, and he put up 40 on my face. I was hoping that it wouldn't happen, but he's been one of the best receivers in the entire league this season. And I want to give kudos to Seattle and my boy Coach McDaniel, who is underrated. Like, do we have we talked not on this podcast? Are people talking about the Seahawks enough? Like genuinely, that team is really, really, really good. And I know I'm gonna trash the Bears a little bit. Like to me, the Bears are like a fake good team. They're like 11. I feel like Seattle is good. A lot of it rides on whether or not Sam Darnold is able to keep it together in fairness, but that's just what you have to deal with when Sam Darnold is your quarterback. You could have a high ceiling, you don't know how quite high it is, but the floor could fall out in some of these big games if you're not careful. However, I think Sam with the good team around him, good coaching staff, learning last year coming off the Minnesota disappointment at the end of the year, Seattle's kind of firing on all cylinders, and the Rams are one of the best teams in the NFL. And when you have a marquee win like that, things are going to bode well for you going into the playoffs. They've won 5 straight. And to me, this doesn't say a lot about the Rams besides the weird locker room distraction type of stuff around Puka. I mean, that's a factor, but they are a veteran team. They got a veteran head coach, a veteran quarterback. I think they're going to be able to keep it together. And even potentially, I could see the Rams making the NFC Championship game. I mean, this is the best overall division in football this year. I mean, all 3 teams, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, have over 10 wins. They're all really good. And I don't think people are talking about Seattle enough in the totality of the NFL discourse.
No, they're not. And I think part of that is just because of Sam Darnold, where they're like, oh, he's going to blow it. He's going to choke. He has that label. And I just think, like you said, he's the kind of guy, I'm going to put him in the same categories like Jared Goff. Is like, the dude is a good talent, but you got to have the team around him. And this Seattle team, and I believe we talked about them either last week or the previous week, they've been slowly building up this defense and this offensive line for years. You know, they trade this year for Rashid Shaheed, add a little bit more firepower with their special teams and the receiving room. We got an older version of Cooper Kupp in there, but he is still making plays. JSN has been phenomenal this year. They have the duo of Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. This is a team that's been in the making for a long time, and I think they realized last year that Geno's not going to be the guy to get them over the hump. Now, I'm not saying if Sam Darnold's the guy to get them over the hump, but I think that's a better chance of that happening with him versus Geno. And my dad is a Seahawks fan. Shout out to Steve Largent. But so I hear more about the Seahawks than I probably do the average person just because of him. But they are there's one of those defenses that if you haven't watched them because I've talked about Denver's defense, I've talked about Houston and their defense. Seattle's in that same category where they're a nightmare to face. I know it's a high-scoring affair, but, man, the Rams, I can make the argument they're the best offense in the league right now. And the fact that, they're able to keep up offensively. They're able to make stops when they need to. And the fact that, in the playoff, we got to see a clutch Sam Darnold moment, with them. They score the touchdown. They go for 2. Instead of trying to, go back and forth, they finish it. And he looked great. And this is not an indictment against the Rams to say, oh, they lost. It's a division game. Whenever I see teams within their own division, unless one is just having a catastrophe of a season, I'm like, it's a coin flip. It doesn't matter where it's at, doesn't matter the time of day. These teams get some extra juice in them, and you don't know who's going to win. And Seattle, those teams both look good. I have no complaints about either. I do wonder between the Puka controversy and then Sean McVay. Apparently, he was sick earlier in the week, and then he had the birth of his son. That's a lot of, not to say that's not an excuse, but that's definitely some extra life work. And then all the Puka stuff is coming out the day or two before the game. Maybe Kenton will want us to show what he was doing on the stream. He could do that for us. I'm
No, I
not.
don't. I don't think I will. Everyone,
You don't want to get canceled.
not yet.
But it just, and of course we had the couple of games, and I caught a little bit of the Bears game last night. I I swear when I walked in, so to all those that don't know, I had a little work thing last night. We went to Topgolf, and they had the Philadelphia Commanders game on, and I thought it was a rerun. I was like, oh, okay, they're just, for whatever reason, they have that on. I completely went over my brain that those two were actually playing. Probably because, I don't know, maybe the Commanders are just awful this year, and I just didn't register with me that they were playing two games last night. So I don't really have much to react to in that game. It looks like that was a pretty handedly one. You know, the Green Bay game seemed really fun, definitely a slow start. But, you were just calling the Bears a little fraudulent. But, man, they keep finding a way
Yeah.
to get wins. And I'm in the same category of them. I'm like, I just don't, as of right now, I believe the Bears are the number 2 seed in the NFC. I don't know how the hell they keep doing it. It's you watch them on offense, and I wouldn't say it's super impressive. Their defense is the definition of a bend, don't break, and they just are so positive in the turnover battle. I will give a lot of kudos and credit. He was one of those guys that when he came out in the draft, I know some people questioned his ability and some of his personality, but I always thought Caleb Williams had the talent to succeed. And I think if, let's just say, they put Justin Fields on this team versus him, I don't know if they're even in the playoff conversation. Caleb's been playing phenomenal this year. He's had some questionable moments still. It's a young guy. I feel like he runs out of the pocket a little bit too much, try to make too many things happen. He honestly reminds me of pre-injury Kyler Murray. That's who I've always thought of him as. I think he's a little bit more accurate, and he's not as run-heavy, but he's the shorter escape artist that he'll make a couple of those plays, and you're like, yeah, that's the first overall pick. I see why.
I'd certainly rather have Caleb Williams than Kyler Murray, although I can't remember if it was last week on the pod or somebody asked me this. It may have been you, whether I would like to have Kyler Murray on the Colts, and I said yes. So, in fairness to Kyler Murray, I will admit that publicly once again. Yeah, the Bears to me just feel a little fraudulent, and I actually my favorite part of the Bears is Ben Johnson. I'm a big fan of his, and I think that was a great coaching hire. The Bears don't often make great coaching hires. I mean, they hit a ringer there. That guy is phenomenal, and pairing him with Caleb Williams is really great. I'm not quite as high on Caleb Williams as some other people, but I totally understand like the hype, the people, discussing him and how he plays quarterback. I think that's all valid. I think his personality could get a little strange, especially if he becomes a big superstar in the league. How is that going to affect the locker room dynamic? Of course, I'm not in the locker room. I don't know. When we were talking about quarterback personalities and quarterbacks being eccentric, I would have put Caleb Williams on that list in a heartbeat, but he's year 2, so I don't feel comfortable doing that to a guy who, yes, may seem a little eccentric, and I'm not even talking about the nail stuff. Like, he snubbed Troy Aikman and Joe Buck on a couple Zoom meetings for ESPN's games like where the broadcast team interviews a quarterback for one of the teams playing in the game. He snubbed them 2 times on Zoom, and to me, that feels on brand for Caleb Williams. I think he acts like a rock star, even though his play on the field doesn't necessarily equate to rock star in that instance. But yeah, the Bears to me feel a little fraudulent. I want to take this back a little bit because I said Mike McDaniel. Mike McDonald is the Seahawks coach's name. Mike McDonald, I want to propose this to you. So he went 10-7 last year. He's now got Sam Darnold at quarterback. They are 12-3. He's on the precipice of winning arguably the toughest division in football, in my opinion, the toughest. Would you rather have Mike McDonald or Nick Sirianni as your head coach? Let's say you.
That's a good question, man. McDonald, honestly.
I'm there. Yeah, I'm with you.
I think Sirianni, he's had some wonderful coordinators and play callers with him, and I think I don't want to say, I think Howie Roseman has done a phenomenal job in terms of building the roster and playing a role in getting some of the pieces around him.
I'm going to say this really quick. Sirianni is a Howie Roseman merchant.
I wasn't going to make the leap. That popped in my head. But I think that the Philadelphia the past couple of years, because of the success that they've had, we've seen a handful of their coordinators jump over to other teams or get other opportunities. And I think this is what we're seeing out of Philadelphia this year is that their talent reserve for coaching is being poached by their franchises. And this is a team. I hate when teams do this, is when we're going to hire within. I'm like, I feel like most of the time it doesn't work. Prove me wrong. Maybe somebody else can come out and be like, oh, that's not true whatsoever. But we talked about their offensive coordinator a week or two ago when he got his house egged, which is still funny. But Sirianni is a product of the talent on the field, and he's had some very good coordinators. And I don't think he's a bad coach. It's one of those guys, if you're going down the list of let me look at my Super Bowl championship coaches, and he's the guy, when you see his name on the list, you're like, oh, really? Just a surprise. I'm not trying to take that away from him. I'm not saying he's a bad coach. I just think he's had a lot of help, and he's been allowed to make mistakes, and I think he's had some other people potentially bail him out. In terms of, because we've been kind of doing a little shotgun approach with this, let's just jump over to the AFC and go down the list of teams that are either in it, locked in, still fighting for seeding, whatnot. So the only team as of right now that has clinched a playoff spot is the Denver Broncos. Denver has a phenomenal defense. Their offense is... They have a little bit of Cincinnati Bengals syndrome where they play towards their competition. You will watch Bo Nix one week and you'll think, wow, this dude might be top 5 quarterback in the league, with this play. And then you'll have another week where I'm like, man, he looks worse than Aaron Rodgers does this season. So up and down. Cortland Sutton's still balling out as the receiver there. And then, their running game's been very solid as well. It's just, honestly, it's the defense that keeps them alive. The GM's done a phenomenal job the past few years building up, and they scalped the 49ers pretty well this past offseason with Ifunga with their safety position, and they've been drafting pretty solid. So it's one of those things. I'm going to maybe make the jump. I'm happy that the Broncos are having the success they have. I'm happy that the Chargers are having the success they have after constantly falling on their face. I am so happy, not for the injury of Patrick Mahomes, but the Kansas City Chiefs dynasty is dead. Let's go.
Totally
no more.
Agree. Woo!
I'm tired. I'm so happy that they missed the playoffs next year. They are $40 million Over the cap, Travis Kelsey's probably done after this year. That's every indicator I've seen recently. They've had multiple poor drafts the past 2 to 3 years. They've had to extend some players that probably other franchises wouldn't because they're trying to hold on to this playoff window. I have no clue if we'll even see Patrick Mahomes next season. This dynasty, at least this portion of the Kansas City's dynasty, is dead. We get to see the Broncos ascend. We get to see the Chargers, who's very banged up. If they were to stay even healthier next year, they might be able to make a bigger run. The good news is for the Chiefs, you will always have the Raiders in your division. That is a franchise that will never see the sun probably ever. We'll see. We'll see. I know that's a big statement there, but man, I don't even remember the last time the Raiders were good. When they went to the Super Bowl?
The last time they made the playoffs was when the Bengals beat them
That's
at
right.
home. And then the last time I think they were legitimately good was 2016 when Derek Carr was kind of in the MVP conversation. I think that was the last time they won the division,
That
but
was
I'm not
the year
sure.
he snapped his fibula in the playoffs.
That's right.
That's right. Um,
And they were actually
but
good that year, by the way, for everyone. The Raiders were good.
they were. That was one of those I just spaced out because I've just too many years of the Raiders being the bottom of that division. But going down the list, you have the Patriots and the Bills. Patriots are at 2. The Bills are right behind them as of, and I'm hoping I'm looking at, yeah, they are. So the Bills are the 6th seed right now. And I don't know, let's just 2 Patriots, 3 Jaguars, 4 Steelers, 5 Chargers, 6 Bills, 7 Texans. In terms of teams that can still get in, you got the Indianapolis Colts, which, no offense, they're not getting in. Um, and then the Baltimore Ravens, which the Ravens can only hope for basically them to fit into the division, winning the division and taking the 4 seed. I feel like everything is basically set. Now it's just the seeding of it. Where does everybody go? Um, in terms of that, Patriots are 11-3. The Bills are 10-4, hot on their tails. Division wise, I've already said the Broncos are locked in for the spot. They're 12-2, and the Chargers are 10-4. So it looks like the Chargers are not going to win the division, but they'll make the playoffs. And we'll see it. The Steelers and Ravens. I'm going to say, let's say the Steelers lock that division spot in. Um, what you tell me, because I think, let's just say if it were to sit like it is now, the Chargers are at the 5 seed, the Bills are at the 6, or maybe they flip flop. But let's just say it's set as it is. What do you think is the scariest team in the AFC or the dark horse?
I think the dark horse in the AFC is the Jaguars, actually. Now, I'm going to add the Bills to this list too. And they honestly, it's probably the Bills because they have a quarterback who's seasoned enough. His nemesis is out of the playoff picture. It's wide open. If he's going to do it, it's going to be this year. I mean, Josh has to step up to the plate. I think Houston is interesting. They have a good defense. I just don't think they're quite as good as some of these other teams. I think the Steelers, although led by Aaron Rodgers and have a good coach, there's still some issues there. I don't see them as a real Super Bowl contender, although I could kind of picture them being a dark horse making the AFC Championship. I just don't think they're quite good enough. And the reason I say the Jaguars is because Jacksonville's offense could just kind of explode like they did last week. I know the Jets aren't a very good team, but I do think they have some talent there that with Liam Cohen and Travis Etienne and Jacoby Myers and Trevor Lawrence, they have the capacity to put up some points and win some games. And I think people, although the Jags are good, I think there's going to be some people, some teams that underestimate them potentially, and that could bode well for Jacksonville going forward. So those are 2 picks I have for dark horses in the AFC. I also want to add on the Chiefs. Kansas City, I said this last year when they lost the Super Bowl, is and I kind of mentioned this about Alabama, and I may have brought up the Patriots earlier. Those two teams were dynastic. They felt inevitable. They felt when you played the New England Patriots under Belichick and Tom Brady or the Saban Alabama Crimson Tide, it's like they're not going to make many mistakes. Their defense is going to be stout. They're going to be big. It's going to be hard to move the ball against them. And you have to play your A plus game for the most part to beat them. And they were good for years and years and years and years and years and years. The Chiefs feel this Chiefs dynasty, although it is a dynasty, is like they felt more like 90s Cowboys to me. They were good every year, but they never felt like it would always feel I'd always feel like they went one on some like BS or somebody getting hurt at an inopportune time. I don't, dude, the Patriots never got shelled against like the Eagles in the Super Bowl. New England was in every Super Bowl. They were like that's why everybody hated to see them there and in the AFC Championship. It's like you're never going to actually like blow New England out. They're going to keep you on your edge at the edge of your seat until the very end of the game. Like imagine being a Ravens fan when Lee Evans got the ball knocked out and then Billy Cundiff shanks the field goal. I would have been so effing pissed. I would have been so pissed. The Chiefs never it never felt like that to me. It never felt like hyper efficient kind of, when and I know they won Super Bowl after Tyreek left. To me, the real Chiefs, when they felt really scary, was when they had Tyreek Hill, and then they just kind of tried to replace him with Xavier Worthy or all these guys who were just kind of a knockoff version of him. Marquez Valdez-Scantling, deep threat kind of thing. Kelsey is aged out of being good. He's still, he can still put up some numbers, but he's very slow now, and he's just not the same player he was. Unfortunately for Patrick, and I like Patrick Mahomes. I know people get annoyed with him because of the refs and how he gets glazed by Chris Collinsworth and Tony Romo. But I like Patrick. I think he's a great quarterback. I think his legacy is a little overrated in comparison to guys like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. I think Patrick is up there, but I'd like to see, how it keeps going towards the back end of his career when Andy Reid may not be there anymore. I think that's interesting to see. What the Chiefs signal to me is a shift in the NFL tide, if you will. Not to say they won't be back here again, like back to the precipice of being good, but I would almost write him off next year. I mean, I could see Mahomes. He's injured late in the season. I could see him missing 5, 6, 7 games. I mean, that's all you need to miss the playoffs in the NFL. And they did miss on some guys in the draft. They're going to have to change their identity of their football team in order to be competitive. They're going to have to really lean on Steve Spagnuolo and the defense, which they were kind of already doing because it seemed like they stopped playing to blow teams out and run up the score and started just kind of tinkering, dinking and dunking to win and just staying close enough so they could, pull it out with their experience. That's not the Chiefs when they burst onto the scene where everybody was so terrified of them. And in fact, you could say the Chiefs dynasty died in the Super Bowl last year when Philadelphia kicked the crap out of them. Like, genuinely, I think because they beat Philly the first time, and I never felt like they should have won that game. In fairness, I'm not some Eagles homer or anything. I thought Philly was probably the better team in that game. They ended up losing. I think last year with a lot of those guys back, Philadelphia was like, dude, we're gonna handle you. Like we are a better team. You are fraudulent. You are the fakest 15-1 or whatever their record was. Like. You're one of the fakest good teams in NFL history. And they were, and they got exposed. And so I think the perception of the Chiefs kind of withered on the vine when that happened. And then they come out here this year with all the Taylor Swift stuff in the offseason and the distraction, and people are talking about them online and all the MAGA stuff associated with the team and their owner. And it just felt like something was bound to snap, and it finally did. And so they're going to have to remake the team's identity. And they're also in the midst of this like stadium battle. People don't really talk about that a lot, but where are they going to put their stadium? Are they going to move out of Arrowhead? They're going to go over to Kansas and get, there's a lot of drama around this team, and they're getting talked about more for their off the field drama than they are for their on field success. Doesn't bode well. So I do think we could put a pin in this era of the Chiefs. Dynastic, great for the late teens, early 2020s, won multiple Super Bowls. Patrick Mahomes, Hall of Famer. Travis Kelce, Hall of Famer. I think the teams we're going to feel that are up and coming are and will remain good coming forward are kind of teams I was talking about before. I think Buffalo is going to remain consistently good with the emergence of New England. I think that's real. I think New England is real. I think Sean Payton and the Broncos, you're going to have the Chargers. These teams at the end of it, the only team I could really see turning it around, are the Ravens and the Bengals, but the Bengals have so many question marks. I say that just because unless the Titans take a real step forward, the Raiders don't have a quarterback. They have an old coach. The Browns, their defense is just kind of holding that together. They have a good coach, but no offensive identity. The Jets are a dumpster fire. Miami's pulled it back from the brink, but there's still a lot of questions there. The Colts, I mean, Daniel Jones, who knows what's going on there. So the Ravens and the Bengals are really the only teams I could see rebounding from this down year. But going forward, it's just the teams we're seeing at the top now, unless like Cam Ward really takes a step and the Titans start to figure it out maybe. But that's kind of my thoughts on all of the AFC.
So I'm going to put you on the spot here. You're like, oh, my two dark horses are the Jaguars and the Bills. So let's just play matchup time right now. So number 2 seed is the Patriots, and as of right now, if we were to finish, it would be against the Houston Texans. Who do you have in that game if it were to happen?
Woo, man, that is tough. I'm going to take New England. That's just what my gut tells me, but my gut is also telling me that Houston could definitely win that game. They're 11-3, but they have a second-year quarterback. I just think Drake May is better than C.J. Stroud, and I think ultimately New England is probably the better team. What about you?
I think I'd probably go Texans here. That's how much of a fan I am of their defense. Man, they're assembling a phenomenal unit on that side of the ball. And I think the Patriots, that would be the toughest defense they would have played all year, in my opinion. And I just don't. I think they would try to rattle Drake May so bad, and I think C.J. Stroud is just so used to almost dying every game because his offensive line is that bad. But they've had some success with Woody Marks when he's able to stay healthy and on the field. They've had some success running the ball. Nico Collins has been balling the past few weeks. Their rookie wide receiver Jaden Higgins is starting to play a more prominent role. I think the Texans are the team that really nobody wants to face coming in, just because of how they play football, especially with nobody talks about. Everybody thinks that when you think of the Vikings, it's Brian Flores and their blitzing defense, and the Texans are just like, we're going to play man and we're going to blitz you. Good luck. We're going to try to knock you onto the ground as many times as we can. Good luck. And the New England's, their offensive line is not as healthy as some people are thinking right now. And I think, when we're talking about playoff time, it's like, yes, we're looking at the records, but you got to talk about what team's hot, what team is healthy. And I've always looked at, if I'm trying to make predictions and projections, who's the healthiest team? Because oftentimes that's the one that matters the most. Who has the most guys to fill in this roster? Because it's like, oh, you can be the second team, but if you're limping to the finish line, and you're on your third right guard, it's like, yeah, I do not trust that guy at all to defend a all-pro potential player that's going to be coming in, multiple snaps, 40 snaps out of the game, pushing through there. The other game, these are your two dark horses. The Buffalo Bills would be visiting the Jacksonville Jaguars. Who's your pick?
I'm going Buffalo. as much as I'd like to see Jacksonville win, I think Buffalo is going to. And let me look. I don't mean to like derail the pod because my laptop is kind of messing up right now, but I'm thinking Patriots Bills right now at the end of the season. New England's got Baltimore, New York, Miami left. They just lost to Buffalo, and then the Bills have, for everyone out there, the Bills have the Browns, Eagles, and Jets. And they're playing the Browns currently. So the Eagles have just clinched, and they're kind of falling apart. But is there any? So I'm taking the Bills. I just think there's more veteran experience there. Again, they kind of feel like the Ravens. They're better than the Ravens, but it's just legacy teams of years past that are good, but they don't feel as good as they should be. But they're relying on their quarterback talent. But Josh has played much better than Lamar has this year. Lamar is a little banged up. Josh is a little banged up too, but I do think the Bills are overall better. Do you think there's any world in which Buffalo could overtake New England here? I know they don't match up again.
I think it's possible. You kind of mentioned their schedule. I can definitely see it. I think the only problem, well, I wonder. I don't have their division record pull up because I believe they split head to head. Um, I think it's definitely possible. That could be a huge jump.
They did split.
Um, I don't know. We'll see. I think Baltimore's about out of gas right now. I could see the Patriots winning out, keeping that two spot. Um, if I had to pick between the Jags and the Bills, I'm going to pick the Jags on this one,
Hmm.
to be honest with you, because this Buffalo defense is gets worse and worse every year because it is an aging unit. I think we've seen too many times this year where if you get Josh Allen out of his rhythm, this is a team that is largely it's built on hero ball by Josh Allen and James Cook running consistently. If you can stop one of those two, and you can put the Buffalo Bills on their back foot. The only problem is, and I think this is why a lot of people will probably hesitate to pick a team against Buffalo, is that Josh Allen, in terms of the AFC, is hands down, like levels above quarterback play compared to some of these other teams. So you always have this miracle factor where it's like, hey, if anybody's going to play, their back is against the wall and they can get them out of it, it's the Bills. I just think enough people don't talk about Jacksonville's defense has been phenomenal this year. This is, what they were looking like when they made a run in the AFC Championship a handful of years ago with Blake Bortles. That defense is looking that good, and they've had really good success. I'll tell you what, Travis Etienne looks like he got rejuvenated this offseason. He's looked phenomenal. And Trevor Lawrence is, for once in his life, playing consistent good football. I'm not seeing him be the turnover machine in the past month. So I'm like, you know what? If they can keep playing everything right, they got the weapons on offense. Their defense is really showing out. I think they're a more complete team than Buffalo. I just think the Buffalo Bills have a couple players that are, you can make the argument, the best in their position. And I think maybe that's the difference maker. And the part of the reason why I'm picking Jacksonville is that the next game, let's just say it's Steelers and Chargers, I would pick the Chargers in that game.
Yeah, I
I
would
do
too.
not want to pick all road teams to the AFC. So that's a little bit of it. I do believe in Jacksonville. I just believe in the Texans that much with the Patriots. And I think anybody from the AFC North that walks into the playoffs is probably going to get demolished by the fifth seed.
Yeah, the AFC North was the biggest divisional disappointment in football this year. The Bengals fell apart. Their defense was wet tissue paper. The Ravens played like crap the entire year. Lamar has regressed from his MVP season. The Steelers, and you got to give some credit to Aaron Rodgers, has kept, and Mike Tomlin, have just kind of chugged along and competently won games and kept them above water in this division. And then the Browns, I mean, we don't even really have to, like, they're just embarrassing. So we were projecting that the AFC North was going to be just this slugfest this year. And then we get a boring Ravens team, a Bengals team who is completely imploded, and we get a lackluster Steelers team at the top of the division. I don't think they're a real threat to win the Super Bowl. Like I was saying, I think they could get to the AFC Championship game because of the competency of their defense and Aaron Rodgers. You know, it's kind of been bend but don't break football, but I don't think they're a real threat. I do like your Houston take. I would hate it personally if they made it far in the playoffs, but D'Amico, like we were saying about Mike McDonald, D'Amico is a great, great, great coach, and Houston is good pretty much every year, especially in the Stroud era. You have to give them a lot of credit. I think their ceiling is limited on offense, but I could see them winning a playoff game, maybe two, although I think there's better teams out there. And then, Jacksonville, it's more, I like, it's fun. I feel it in my gut, but I just need to see it in on like a real playoff stage. Liam Cohen, I think, is a great coach. Great hire by Shad Khan. They don't, like we were saying about the Bears earlier, they typically don't hire great coaches. And here we go. It seems like they got their guy, former offensive coordinator at UK, by the way. But I really, dude, when I'm looking at the AFC here, I mean, am I really going to pick the Broncos? I feel like they're not fake good. They are good, but there's a little fraudulent alert, kind of. Yeah, it's like the fire alarm is going off and you're in the other room and there's a big thick door that's like closed, separating you from the two, but you can still kind of hear the fire alarm going off in the other room. It's kind of like one of those things where, yes, they're good. Yes, they're legitimate. I don't think they're frauds, but there's a little, we'll see. I mean, do we really, really think Bo Nix is going to be hoisting the Lombardi trophy at the end of this year? I say no effing way, dude.
I haven't even got to sit down. If you're putting me in that pressure cooker today, I am not ready to pick Super Bowl favorites or anything like that today. It's too early for me to be making that wild of statements.
Right,
I can give
right.
you first round, wild card predictions. I agree with you and be like, oh, do I think Denver's going to be the team to beat in the AFC? I'm like, they're a good team, but I don't see any clear favorite on the AFC side. And to be honest, I don't see
Wide
any clear
open.
favorite on the NFC side either, which is good. It's good for us. It's good football. Um, I unless you want to keep diving in, I want
Well,
to
I
jump
actually,
over.
yeah, I want to bring one more thing up. I want to circle back to the Rams really quick because you brought up the NFC being wide open. I totally agree about the AFC being wide open. The NFC, we gave Seattle their flowers. We kind of brushed over Chicago, talked about them a little bit. The Eagles, I think we both are probably on the same vibe with the Eagles. They're a good team. They have a lot of experience, but they're kind of imploding here. They feel like they're limping across the finish line. And then the Buccaneers, they're also imploding. So when I look at every team in the playoffs, it kind of all comes back to the NFC West to me. And it's not that I don't think Seattle could make it far in the playoffs. I know we're kind of talking about first round matchups, so I don't want to project out Super Bowl winners. But man, this is ripe for a Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford type of run here, where the competency, their offensive scheme, their veteran leadership, it feels like the Rams could go on a little bit of a run. And I think they're going to be a scary team to beat because if you're taking like matchups, like if they played Chicago, I'm taking the Rams. If they played the Seahawks again, I'm still taking the Rams, even though I think the Seahawks are legitimately great. The and then we have the 49ers, and I think they're really good, but they're not quite the 49ers of years past, in my opinion, as far as scariness in the playoffs. So, if I had to pick a team to beat in the NFC right now, or a team that I think that could legitimately, win a couple games, Los Angeles is looking like that team for me.
The only reason I hesitate on LA because I do think if I had to pick a favorite, I would probably pick them as well. I I want to see how long it takes for Devontae Adams to get back. Because when you're 31 plus years old and you suffer a hamstring injury that looked that bad, I don't know when he's coming back. I think they're being optimistic, but they're like, oh, I hope we can get him by playoff time. I'm like, I don't like that you're saying that, when we still have 3 more weeks to go for the playoffs. Um, not that they're a bad unit without him or anything. It's just that extra weapon there. And you have Puka, who is phenomenal talent, but how many times? I mean, I feel like he gets hurt every game and he's able to come back in. But I'm like, what are you going to do if the situation? And I could play this what if scenario, I guess, with every team. But I'm like, hey, what if Puka were to go down for a series and it's like you need him, but he can't be on the field and you don't have Devontae Adams at the same time? I feel like, man, and the Rams defense is phenomenal, but I've seen them give up a lot of points this year too to some teams. Now I will agree, we're on the same wavelength with Philadelphia, who right now has already won the division, and so they can't finish any lower than the 3 seed at this point. Um, the Bears are at the 2 seed right now. They haven't clinched the playoffs just because the Packers and the Lions are, they're not too far behind them. But I don't see them just falling out of the playoffs. I don't see that. The Buccaneers it's the Buccaneers and the Panthers, and they're playing today. They're both 7-7. We'll see. They're the 4 seed. Whoever wins out between those two. I do think the only teams that could potentially beat the Rams are the ones in their division, and that's the Seahawks and that's the 49ers. Part of that's familiarity and the coaching level. I don't think the Eagles. If you told me the Eagles made the NFC Championship this year, I'd be shocked. I really, really would. I don't trust the Bears. I think the Packers lost the sail out of their winds when Micah went down, Micah Parsons. I still think they're a great team, but I just, they're that team that's right now that's one a piece or two away, and Micah was that piece from making a deep run. I think the Lions, if they were to sneak in, could be a little scary. Um, I could see them game plan wise. They could give the Ram a little bit of fit, but I would still pick the Rams in that scenario. But I'll try to play the projection game because it's not as easy. So let's just say the Seahawks were to take the 1 seed. They hold it. They have the bye. And let's say the Bears hold on to that 2 seed. So it would be the Bears versus probably the Packers or the Lions. Let's say Packers for now. So we got Bears and Packers. Who would you have in that matchup? We just saw it last night. But I don't trust divisional games like that.
I'm actually going to take Green Bay in that.
I think I would too.
And the Micah thing, I understand that. That's very tough. But I still think Packers, veteran coach, veteran quarterback, Ben Johnson, Caleb Williams still getting on the same page. It was a big win last night, but I think overall Green Bay is still the team I'd pick. I also want to add this really quick. If I was a Cowboys fan looking at these teams in the playoffs, looking back through your schedule here, I would be sick to my effing stomach, dude. They lost to the Panthers. They lost to the Cardinals. They lost to Minnesota. And I'm looking through this, and they're not Dallas is not a bad team, in my opinion. I think they're probably, right where they should be. They could be on the precipice of like the wild card. They're kind of in. But how the dominoes have fallen, and you have Dak Prescott, and I just would be sick to my stomach if I'm a Cowboys fan. Because who's to say the Cowboys, the Lions, you could throw them in that category too. Like who's to say they couldn't rip off a couple? It's wide open this year. So I just wanted to add that. But yeah, I'm on the Packers if that's the matchup.
And then let's say it would be 3 and 6. That would be Eagles and 49ers.
Man, I'm taking San Fran.
I think I am too. I don't trust Philadelphia. I think they have been in a very six. They had the opportunity of their division this year between the Commanders, between the Giants, between the Cowboys, where it's like, hey, if you want to talk about the worst division in football this year, that might, besides the Eagles, besides the NFC South, that might be your nomination. Um, I think you could make the argument that that's the second worst. I agree. I think I'd take the 49ers in that matchup. And then it would be the Buccaneers or the Panthers versus the Rams. I'm taking the
I'm
Rams
taking
over
the
the
Rams.
Panthers.
Yeah.
So, you know what? I do agree. I think the AFC is more open. I know initially I said the NFC is also open. I think I've given more credit to the division rivals with the Rams, but I think the top end of the NFC is scarier than the top end of the AFC right now.
Yeah, I think there's more competency and experience at maybe not with the Bears, but the teams like we were saying, Green Bay, San Francisco, the Rams. You could even put the Buccaneers in there a little bit, even though they're on the fringe of it. And then Seattle, Philadelphia. All those teams are. You see those teams in the playoffs. Typically, they're in the playoffs every year. San Fran, the Rams. You go over to the AFC, and you kind of have the new New England Patriots. The Jags are good. The Steelers, even though they have Aaron Rodgers, they haven't. The Steelers aren't typically in the. They're in the playoffs, but they're not like a threat or anything. They kind of just feel like they limp in every year. And then, the Broncos with Sean Payton. That's still relatively new, also. So there's a little more. It's a little greener in the AFC, where the NFC, I feel like it's established coaching staffs, it's established defenses and rosters. Could that put the NFC over the top in the Super Bowl this year? Well, I mean, we'll see. But it's been a very weird NFL year. I mean, we're sitting here reacting to it late in the season, and we got the Jags and the Patriots and the Broncos, and we have the Bears are good again. It's been very weird. The early 2020s feels just dead in the water right now. Ravens, Bengals, Chiefs, who cares? They suck. They are totally out of it. And, we're not. Detroit is the one team that I'm a little disappointed is not a little better. I think similarly to the Bills, if the Lions were a little better this year, I mean, this could be a year people would like, hey, what about the Lions? Yeah, it's kind of open. Could the Lions do it? And they're just on the fringe.
I guess I got one more topic, one more thing that I'd like to bring up. This is not our Super Bowl pick, but let's just say we are Roger Goodell. It's like, oh, we want what's best for the NFL. Who do we want in our Super Bowl? Who do you think out of these 7 teams at AFC, NFC that you think Roger Goodell would want to see in the Super Bowl?
Who do I think the Shield prefers? That's an interesting question. Looking at all the teams off the rip, I think Roger Goodell would either want the Rams or the 49ers on the NFC. I'm going to defer to the Rams. I think Los Angeles, Hall of Fame quarterback, Hall of Fame coach, potential MVP in Matt Stafford. You also, if San Francisco, Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy, Kyle Shanahan, one of those two teams, I'm going to slightly give the edge to the Rams just because they've been better for this season. And then on the AFC, I'm going Buffalo. I think they want to see Josh Allen in the Super Bowl. I think they want to see him competing for it. Buffalo opens up their new stadium next year, which is going to be a big, spectacle. The state of New York and the franchise invested a lot of money into that stadium. And Josh Allen potentially coming off a Super Bowl appearance, another All-Pro season, potentially MVP the season prior. I think, they could build his like John Elway-esque legacy, continue that. So I'm going Bills and Rams. What about you?
I completely agree with the Bills. I think that's the only choice that the Shield would want. They'd be like, we can finally get Josh Allen, one of the poster boys, in a Super Bowl. Hopefully he wins, and then they can trot him out as another golden boy. I agree with the NFC. I will just add one more. So I can see the Rams. I can see the 49ers. I could see them wanting to push the Bears into the conversation just because of the market and because, oh, look at this, historical matchups between these two long-term franchises. Chicago is one of the second oldest in NFL history, and haven't been to a Super Bowl in years. And you have this Wonder Boy first overall pick, Caleb Williams, the new coach with Ben Johnson. So I agree with the other two picks. I think the Bears could fit in that category. Do I think the Bears make it to the Super Bowl? Hell no. I don't. But this is the hypothetical of, as Roger Goodell, what is the best for our markets? I just wanted to play that little game there because
Yeah,
all right.
I also think so with the Bills and let's say San Fran or the Rams, you kind of get the East Coast West Coast thing going on, which I think Goodell would like. If the Bears did it, it feels a little 2021 Bengalsy. Although you like if Joe Burrow wasn't on the Bengals, like even with Joe Burrow on the Bengals, the NFL is never going to push them. Like Goodell's never sitting there like we need Cincinnati in the Super Bowl. No, 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 no. They'd have to turn into like Kansas City or something for that to happen, and I think that has long passed. But it feels a little like 2021 Bengalsy, where the number one overall pick from the year prior, he gets his beak wet a little bit. Joe Burrow's seasoned, shortened by injury in year one, and Caleb Williams didn't play, that great. And he had a decent statistical season, but nobody was coming away like, oh, Caleb Williams, he is what we thought he was. But he's rebounded here in year two. He's got a good coach, and I think that's kind of the play there. It's like, here's our next wonder boy. Here's who we were thinking was going to be good, and he actually is good. There's a lot of parallels there, actually, now that I think about it. I mean, if you take away the national championship from LSU, I mean, both Heisman Trophy winners with Caleb and Joe, both year two, division winners. Bears, I think, are a little better than that. I don't want to say they're better than the Bengals team, but they had, 11, 12 wins. That Bengals team had 10. It was a dogfight for most of the year for them. And nobody took them serious as contenders. I don't think people or the Bengals serious as contenders that year until they, I think, beat Tennessee. But with the Bears, I don't think people take them that serious as contenders either. However, I do think there's more of a case for them to potentially go on a run here, especially with Ben Johnson coaching.
Yeah, it's we'll just have to wait and see. That's all we can do. For all we know, that some of these seedings may change. We got all these games going on right now. Yeah, it's a matter of time from here on out. I'm excited. I'm not trying to rush it because I realize how many weeks that we have left. I mean, we have the Super Bowl probably in a month and a half from now. It's usually the first or second weekend in February. So I'm going to enjoy as much football as I can before I go into basketball mode. That being said, do you have any other topics that you'd like to throw at the table here?
I think that's everything for me. I mean, I just hope everybody has a great holidays. Christmas is right around the corner. New Year's coming up. I mean, this is a big time for sports, but we're going to have a little bit of a lull here before we head into the college football, championship season, the NFL playoffs. Obviously, we'll have Christmas Day NBA, which is a big thing. Next year, we also got the Olympics and, or not the Olympics, sorry, the World Cup. Actually, the Winter Olympic, but I'm not a big Winter Olympics guy. So we have a big sports year coming up and a big sports season this winter right around the corner. So, yeah.
Yeah, we do. We got a lot of those to look forward to in the coming year. It's one of those just because of the Winter Olympics and the timing, I'll probably try to dive a little bit more into it. I'd also agree I'm not a huge Olympic viewer. mostly because the timing of all the different events are all over the place, and I'm not about, it's like, ooh, let me watch the event at 2:30 in the morning. I'm like, it is what it is. But yeah, I need to get into that, and then the World Cup being back here in the U.S. that's a pretty big deal. Not a huge soccer fan by any means, but it's one of those where you got to take it in the moment. They only happen every 4 years, and it's been quite a long time since we've had it back in the States. Um, that being said, I hope everybody has a wonderful Christmas, great holidays, Happy New Year. We are not 100% sure. We don't know when the next episode's going to come out just yet. We'll talk about it. Maybe we'll have something out next week, or maybe it'll be after the holiday break. Who knows? Just because we haven't talked with each other about what our plans are. So, thank you everybody for listening. We hope you have a wonderful Sunday and a good rest of your week. If you haven't, we greatly appreciate if you like, subscribe, share with your friends. We're doing this for fun, but the more people that want to hear us talk for some reason, the more we're willing to, spread the word.
Yeah, everyone, go ahead and like and subscribe. I'm going to echo what Logan said, and have a great holiday season.